Hello, Thought Roomies, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Hallie Rose. What a couple of weeks it has been for me transitioning into living in my new hometown of Austin, Texas. So much going on, and it's been a little difficult at times to stay grounded, which I'm sure some of you can relate to that when the pieces of your life feel like they're moving very, very fast. But on the plus side, everything that's going on is super exciting. And I feel honestly like I can say more than ever before that I'm fully aligned with living my dream. So that's the kind of challenge I want to be living in, is balancing so many beautiful things coming in. And I can tell you, it wasn't always this way for me. But this week, I was feeling a little bit weighted down by the amount of work that I have going on. And I was sort of feeling hard on myself, like I just couldn't get everything done. And there weren't enough hours in the day for me to be the best coach I can be to all my clients and to also meet all of these new people who are coming in, men that are applying for the Conscious Man course that's starting in January, and produce the podcast and take time for self-care. And I was feeling, even though that I love everything that I do, I was having moments where I felt sort of bogged down by it all, not looking forward to posting on social media, meeting my own resistance. And I was in the shower, and I love the shower. The shower is a place of supreme peace for some reason. That's when I have some of my best ideas come through. I think it's because when you're in the shower, there's nowhere else you can be. You just have to be there doing what you're doing. And there's this amazing presence process that comes with that. And I was in the shower and I had lines of poetry start coming into my mind, writing themselves. And I felt this profound sense of gratitude because amidst all the moving and the clients and the work, I haven't had as much time to write. And creation is part of my soul. And so it was like tasting something delicious after months without it, this poem coming through to me. I hopped out of the shower immediately and I wrote down the whole thing line by line. In maybe 5 to 10 minutes, this poem was complete. And I had the bravery to post it on Instagram yesterday. And one of the comments was from a listener of the show who suggested that I read it for you all on the next intro of the next podcast. And so that is what I'm going to do now, is share a little bit of my soul with you. For 10 days, we made love. You came to the altar of my body and prayed. I anointed you with my wetness, my lips, and the rose petals between my hips. I strung you like silk between my thighs. You offered yourself a holy sacrament, my cup to drink from your loins, and once drunk on the rapture of being, we baptized each other in the holy waters of passion. The bed sheets breathed like the ocean, kneading us deeper into the folds of one another. Soft flesh, heavy chest, rising and falling, our daily bread. Writing this poem reminded me how important it is to take time to do the things that really make our souls feel alive. And sometimes we get so caught up in the hamster wheel of the work that we forget that everything we want is right here in the present moment. And that joy is in those sacred moments of presence. So take this as an invitation to find a little space in your day for those things that you love, for those things that you're constantly putting off because there just isn't enough time. And recognize that all of that is an illusion, and you can make the choice right now to create space for things that you love. I'm really excited about everything that is happening with the Conscious Man, the men's course and collective that I am creating, launching in January 2021. The spaces are filling up, and it is so exciting to connect with all of you from this community. Incredible, amazing men. We've already got men signed up from Florida, from New Hampshire, from Colorado, from California, all over the United States. We even have some from Canada. So if you are listening to this and you have been hearing this call and not sure if it's for you and experiencing resistance, I want to share that you're not the only one who might be unsure, and that uncertainty is part of your process. And so just to honor that and lean in and get curious about your experience. And I want to encourage you that even if you're not sure, you just really sit with that and visit the website and see if the application lights you up. Because sometimes just even in the process of getting curious and exploring, you'll learn things about yourself. So if you fall into that category, I want you to head over to hallierose.com/men, and you can punch in your info and start filling out the application questions. It's like a little quiz, and see if what I'm creating feels aligned with you. I had a follower on Instagram last week reach out and say to me, I've seen what you've been posting about the Conscious Man, and it has literally taken me 3 weeks to even send this DM of inquiry to you and curiosity. And I'm not sure if I'm ready, but I'm willing and I want to learn. And so here I am leaning into my own resistance and reaching out to you. And that is exactly the sort of mood that it takes to delve deeper on this personal journey of growth and development. It's not that you don't have to feel fear at all. Everybody feels fear. It's that we watch our fear, we see it come up, we notice our resistance, and we say, I see who you really are. I see what you really are. And I am not going to choose to stay small. So again, if any of this excites you, pop on over to hallierose.com/men. That's HALLIEROSE.com/men, and check out the application. This week, we're also celebrating the Thought Room's 1-year anniversary birthday. I am so flabbergasted that it has been 1 year since the show launched. This will be episode 31. Thank you all so much for listening and supporting this show. You mean the world to me. If you want to go the extra mile and help show your gratitude and show how much this show means to you, you can help out by leaving an Apple review. It's a small thing, but it actually really makes a big difference for us as a show because it helps our show show up at the bottom along with, when it says other shows you might like. It helps guests who check us out and are considering guesting on the show see what kind of traction, how many people listen to the show. And so it might seem like a small thing or an annoying thing. I know that personally, I have to really love something to leave a review. And maybe you're like that too. But I want to let you know, if you enjoy this show, leaving a small 1 or 2 line review would mean the absolute world to me. And if you do it, leave your Instagram handle somewhere in the review, and you might just get a surprise thank you from me popping into your DM inbox at some point. This week, our show is with Zach Bitter. Zach is an American ultra marathon runner. He holds world records for the 100-mile run and the 12-hour run. He has the best times for these, and we will go into more of what his records are in the show. Zach is also training for an immense undertaking in the year 2021, which he is planning a trans-continental run from San Francisco to Brooklyn. That's right. He's going to run across America and try to be the fastest man to do it. So we talk about that in this episode and how to scaffold yourself to succeed in massive undertakings of this sort. Zach talks about creating micro goals and actually enjoying the process of something very difficult that you're working toward. We talk about mindfulness, training progressions, finding your purpose, and dreaming big. So listen through to the end. And without further ado, let's get into the thought room with my new friend, Zach Bitter. Zach Bitter, welcome to the Thought Room. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm so excited to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
So, you and I just met through our mutual friend, Justin Wren, and we're here in Phoenix now, but we actually just met last week in Sedona. And can you tell everyone why you were up there and what you were participating in with Justin?
Yeah, so I kind of found out a little bit last minute, I think, but Justin had reached out to me and said, hey, I'm going to be in Phoenix and Sedona for a few weeks. Be fun to meet up when they're there. And when Justin calls, I answer. So so when he said he was going to be in Sedona, I'm maybe about an hour and a half to an hour, 45-minute drive south of there here in Phoenix. So you don't need good excuses to go up to Phoenix, but Justin is certainly a good excuse to go up to Phoenix. So it was a blast to head up there and kind of check out everything that was going on up there. It was a lot of festivities happening.
Yeah. And, this is something I want to jump into at some point during this interview, but the two of you and Justin led a workshop together. And I want to talk about how your relationship with Justin started and how you got inspired to start doing some work with him. But first, I want to tell people listening who you are and what you do. And what you do, I just have to say, is, you are super inspiring. And getting to spend some time with Justin over this past week, he just had the most amazing things to say about you. And he's like, you've got to interview this guy. And so that's so beautiful when you have a friend who is just your absolute hype man like this. But you are an ultra marathon runner.
Yeah.
Can you tell anyone who's listening who's never heard that term ultra marathon before? What does that mean?
Yeah, so basically it'd be almost anything longer than a marathon being 26.2 miles or 42 kilometers. So most folks would consider like the entry level to ultramarathon being like a 50-kilometer race, which is 31 and a quarter miles. So that's kind of like the next step after a marathon in distance. And then you can get about as crazy as you want after that. A lot of people will do like 50 milers or 80 Ks or 100 Ks as like a kind of another step up from that. And then in North America anyway, like the 100-mile distance is a distance that a lot of people try to like aspire to and get to. And from there, I mean, you can go on the trails, you can go on the track, the roads, mountains, all sorts of different environments that you can run in. And then time frames can be or timeframes or distances can be pretty long. Anything from like 6-day, 10-day events where essentially you're seeing how far you can get in a certain amount of time. So it's really a ton of different opportunities within the sport. It's almost like an umbrella of a variety of different sports almost when you get to it, because what it takes to run a high quality 10-day event is going to be a lot different than what you would need to do to prepare for, say, like a 50-miler or something that's a little on the shorter end of ultramarathon. So it's definitely kind of has a little bit of a slippery slope element to it, where I think people dip their toe into it thinking like, I wonder what this is like. And once they kind of get that experience and I think dive into the community of ultramarathon runners, they get the edge to try like a variety of different things. And a lot of times like folks will just work their way up in distance, or if they really like a specific distance or a certain type of terrain, then they'll really try to fine tune their abilities within that. So for me personally, I've been pretty interested the last few years in the 100-mile distance, and that's where I focus most of my energy. But I love a lot of the different stuff too. From so far, I've run anywhere from 50K up to 200K for races and things like that.
Wow. And a little bit later, we'll get into the nuance of what you were describing about training for different types of events and how that changes actually what you have to put into it and the diet and all of that. But I want to go back to the 100-mile because is it true that you currently hold a world record for the 100-mile?
Yeah. So I have the fastest time for 100 miles, which is 11 hours, 19 minutes, and 13 seconds. And then I also have the furthest run in 12 hours.
Can I just interject there and say, wow, running 100 miles in under 12 hours.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is that indoor or outdoor?
It was indoors, actually, at the Olympic training facility in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, called the Pettit Center.
Justin showed me a photo of you that was like you running on a treadmill. And then there was a backup treadmill next to it, just in case. Was that because in case the one of them burned out?
Yeah.
That you could just jump over and continue trying to break the world record?
Yeah, so that was once, 2020 has been a crazy year for a lot of people, almost everyone, I would imagine. So for me, being an endurance athlete, what that kind of meant was there was really no events on the forecast for a while. And by the time we got to like maybe April, it became pretty clear that the likelihood of me being able to get to an event in even this year was going to be pretty slim. So I was fortunate that I had some contacts at NordicTrack who I pitched an idea to them about doing an at-home world record chasing attempt for 100 miles in 12 hours on a treadmill. So in May this year, I jumped on the treadmill and went for that one. But yeah, basically what you said is the way to think about it is you don't want to get 8 hours into, a 12-hour run and then have the machine fail on you. So, or, anything could happen, or if it's just like something you could lose power to a certain machine or something like that, and then have that backup to be able to switch to. So it was the safe bet to do, and NordicTrack was kind enough to set it up, so I wasn't gonna complain.
I'm thinking about the feeling of when you train hard for something and then you finally attain that goal. And you and I were talking at a gathering, a social gathering. We were at a different evening, and you were describing to me what you love so much about running and training. And it's actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but these little like micro goals that you hit. Do you want to talk about that a little more? Yeah,
I think that carries over both into the training or the buildup as well as the race itself. So the way I kind of like to look at it when I'm trying to pick what I want to do next is I want to be able to go to train for an event, and if I end up at that event and have a really bad race or a really bad day, still be glad I did it. So in order to do that, I have to enjoy the process. And the reason I got to that point, I think, is just because I just took inventory of essentially how much time I was investing into this sport. And it's like pretty ridiculous, actually, when you think about it. I've got like 20-hour training weeks sometimes. And when I started, I was a full-time teacher. So 20 hours of training on top of a full-time job is, that's your life essentially at that point. So you better enjoy it, or you're going to walk away unfulfilled at some point. And nobody wants that. So when I started trying to pick what I wanted to do, I started getting interested in just kind of the idea of how do you prepare your body best for these specific events? And then what are the kind of benchmarks that I would need to hit along the way, from like a workout to workout standpoint, from a week to week standpoint, from a specific block of training within the cycle that I'm doing to prepare for an event. and really be able to find out where the spots are where I can see like, okay, I made progress there, or that was the best I've ever done that workout in, or I'm heading in the right direction here. Now I'm ready to move on to the next step. You just kind of gamify it almost.
Totally.
And that's really helped me kind of enjoy that and feel like I'm accomplishing things along the way. I'm getting little like intrinsic rewards, I guess, along the way to the race. So by the time I get there, I'm already really excited about everything I had done. And then if you have a good race on top of it, that's just kind of like double benefit, I guess, or double excitement.
Yeah, I love that. Like creating the container, the systems, and the structure to thrive within. That's incredible. And you were saying, well, and I guess this is a good segue into what you're gearing up for next. But you were describing, speaking of gamifying, it's like talking about the calories that you have to consume for what you're talking about doing next. Maybe let's back up and you can describe what your next big venture is, and then how you are gamifying that for yourself currently.
Yeah. So around this time next year, well, hopefully around this time next year, I'll be almost finishing. But the plan is around mid-September to start what they call a trans-continental run. So there's a variety of different routes for the trans-continental runs. One of Justin's friends actually did a hiking version of it where he was unsupported and went in a little more remote than I'm going to do. But essentially, it's like a route from San Francisco to New York in most cases. And there's been folks who've gone after the record for how fast you can go from essentially San Francisco to New York. And so that one kind of has a fairly designated route that is like the record route, I guess, where I think most people who are going after the record are going to pick that same one just for, so it's the same. So you can compare.
So let's just be clear for those listening. You are planning on running from San Francisco to New York and basically trying to break the record to be the fastest man to do that.
Yeah.
No big deal.
I'm trying to normalize it a little bit because I think that's almost something you have to do in order to like not get too like anxiety invoked with it all. So, but I mean, it's going to be different enough from what I have done. And the preparation, I think, will be exciting. The cause will certainly be almost necessary, if you ask me, in order to, I think, accomplish it, which is going to be a different angle, I think, for me, because a lot of times, we talked about this a little bit too, where like if I pick a race or I'm targeting like a record or something like that, it's kind of a selfish endeavor in the sense that, you know, I'm doing this for me because I want that record and I'm going to require resources and people to help me do that. So you lean on a lot of people and you lean on a lot of things and, you know, different like race directors, companies to help you get from A to B to prepare you with the right gear and all that stuff. So there's a lot of help. And I think you do that enough. I've been doing ultramarathons for, I guess it's technically 10 years now. 10 years. I did my first ultramarathon in, I think it was September 2010. So I basically hit 10 years this year. So you do enough of those. I think I've done almost 70 at this point. I think naturally you start looking to like, well, how can I kind of give back? And there's a lot of ways to give back within this sport too. I mean, you can volunteer to crew and pace for other runners. You can volunteer at aid stations at events and things like that. And ultimately, though, I wanted to try to do something even bigger than that. So I've had my eye on this trans-continental route basically since I started running ultramarathons as like something that I thought would be a cool like life goal at some point. And I want to say it was probably near the middle to last third of last year, I started thinking about like actually picking a date and starting to organize it. And I knew in order to do it right, I wanted to have a cause around it, something to kind of generate some attention for and hopefully raise some money for it. And I had been familiar with Justin Wren and his Fight for the Forgotten Foundation for a few years. I'd listened to him on Joe Rogan and on the Mind Pump podcast and probably a couple other ones as well. Just, you know, tell his story. And it was just, as a former teacher, it was just it made me think in ways that I didn't really even think about when I was teaching, when I was probably in a position to be most impactful for, you know, someone like Justin when he was younger, or the hundreds and thousands of kids who are in a position like that currently, with just like, you know, in a situation where the way I describe it is just the headspace you have to be in if you're going to wake up in the morning and know that like there's no chance someone's going to do something nice for you. And you're just accounting for how many times you're going to try to avoid getting bullied, avoid being like put down, and essentially like being forced to live this life of negativity and have to really, really fight hard to find even a shred of positivity. And I guess like what that did for me is it kind of highlighted essentially that I've had a lot of absence of that in my life. You know, I've never really felt like I've been bullied in a meaningful way where it was scarring for sure. You know, everyone has bad days, but like it can always get worse. And you know, Justin's story really highlighted for me like, you know, how cruel things can get. And then when he really started to kind of come out the other end of that and find himself, and his first decision was not just to help people, but to try to, you know, find some of the most forgotten people on the planet and start helping them, and then actually realize that. And then I realized Justin's actually younger than me. I was like, oh man, how does this guy do this stuff at such a young age? And so it's just super inspiring. And so I reached out to him thinking like, if I can connect with Justin and do this for Fight for the Forgotten, and help branch into like what he's trying to do and help him out with that, I think that would be just the perfect partnership. So I sent Justin a message, I think on Instagram, thinking he probably wouldn't see it. And then I would eventually reach out on the website and maybe get a hold of him eventually. But he responded within a few minutes, and I was stoked to know that he was really excited about it, probably more excited than I was even. So it didn't take too long after that. I think we met actually then in, I believe it was late February. He was doing, Fight for the Forgotten was picked to do this big fundraiser with this high school in Oklahoma City, Santa Fe High School, where they spent a full week raising funds for a charity of choice. And they picked Fight for the Forgotten. And Justin invited me and my wife, Nicole, out to help out with that. And it was just such a moving experience to watch all of that take place and see Justin's cause and the Why Fight group that they're partnering with too, which is actually targeting like bullying and trying to develop curriculum for schools to help combat bullying and educate people about why and how that happens and how you can help and how you can be a big difference, and essentially try to simplify as much as possible very complex issues so that we can minimize the amount of that type of behavior that ends up happening in our schools around the United States. And so to be able to see that in person and engage with that was just like, I knew at that point, like, okay, this was definitely the right move. Meeting Justin in person for the first time, really seeing him actually do what he does best, was reassurance. And then after the event itself too, like I had a couple people reach out to me even and just say like, yeah, I really enjoyed what you talked about running. I started running after I heard you talk, and you know, it's really helped my mental health. And just seeing that just is really cool to know that like what you're doing isn't maybe quite as selfish as you once thought, that you can leverage it in a way where you can help other people too. It doesn't have to be a selfish endeavor. It can be a giving back as well if you can kind of connect with the right people and go at it the right way.
This is so beautiful. And I think this is something absolutely to underscore for anybody listening who is thinking about their life purpose, you know, and what they want to do. And we'll go back to, you know, teaching in a second, and when running actually went from a hobby to a career. But I just think, you know, what I'm hearing from you is there's no more one satisfying thing in the world than finding what your gift is and being able to use it in a way that is of service to others. It's almost like, for me, it's like letting God come through you. Like it's no longer about Zach, the runner, breaking all the records, you know? It's about inspiration. It's about your God-given gifts and the gifts that you've earned. And we'll talk about that too, because from when I was talking to Justin before this interview, he was like, yeah, you know, Zach was just running in high school and he was like kind of good, but he wasn't like the best. And like he really put in a lot of work. And I think that there's just no more delicious thing in the whole world than finding what your gifts are and then shifting them to give back to the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like for me, part of it too was when I stepped away from teaching to kind of pursue running more full time, it wasn't because I wanted to get out of the teaching world. I'd actually found the spot that I thought was like, okay, this is my end game in teaching. This is the spot I want to be. The way the school was structured and kind of the way it was all set up was just fit my personality perfectly. It fit my interests perfectly. I would have loved to stick around and really see through a career at that place. But I also knew that the lifetime of a professional athlete is very short relative to most careers. So I kind of had this choice of like, do I chase this passion for a while and put teaching on the back burner for a little bit and maybe go back depending on where life leads me, or do I just stay the course and perhaps when I'm 40, 50 regret not taking that plunge and chasing some of those dreams and trying that out. And my thought was like, well, since I can go back to teaching if I want, I mean, worst case scenario is I belly flop on this running experiment and 2 years later I'm teaching again and it's not really that big of a deal.
Which clearly didn't happen.
No, things went a little better for me than that, thankfully. But yeah. I mean, but I think that was part of it's just like, I think taking risks, not to go on too much of a tangent, I think taking risks is part of life. And I think people who do that find it more fulfilling. So I'm not afraid to take risks. But at the same time, it's like, I think you also want to be smart about it too, where like, my risk was I come back with my tail between my legs. Hey guys, I guess I wasn't as good as I thought I could be. So I'm back teaching again, which wouldn't have been the end of the world. I wouldn't have been out on the streets, which it can always be worse, like I said before. But like, yeah. So I mean, for me, it was like, I think going forward with my running career and everything that kind of comes with it, I want to weave in that element that I left behind, which is that education side of things, like that part where like people become a teacher because they want to help people. They want to help kids. They want to help structure or help people frame their life the way they want it in a way that they can be successful so they don't, trip over hurdles as frequently. And I think that I see that as the main role of a teacher is helping young people navigate maybe one of the more difficult parts of their life so they're in a position to be successful when they're adults. And I think like being able to help out with a cause and help out with some of the events that they're related to kind of brings a little bit of that back into my life that I left behind. So that's another kind of fulfilling thing for me personally.
Yeah, I'd love to go into this with you because you and I both have a teaching background. And in the car, we got to talk about this a little bit. And correct me if I'm wrong, were you in sort of like an alternative teaching situation?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really interesting actually. So like I started out as a public school teacher. And then after I taught full-time for a couple of years at the middle school level, I took a job at the Middleton Cross Plains School District, which is one of the nicer school districts in the state of Wisconsin. And they got a grant where they were going to turn what their traditional alternative school, which typically has kind of a negative connotation where like you end up at the alternative schools because you made a mistake. It's like you couldn't cut it at the real school because you had some behavioral issue or, something went wrong, right? And you ended up there. So they wanted to kind of spin that around where we look at this, we have this opportunity for students if they learn differently. They can go to what they were starting out as kind of like a project-based democratic education setup. So it was more than just, it was different than your traditional school in that like you didn't go to like period 1 is math, period 2 is science, then English, writing and all that stuff. And you're just kind of getting those in compartments. What they wanted to do is they wanted to come up with like bigger topics and interests that the student have and then weave those subject layers into the topic itself. So it really had more of a real life implication or connection point. So I guess the easy way to say it is instead of trying to explain to the student, why are we learning algebra? You bring the interest that the student has to the table and then you find the algebra within it because then it just tells them by them doing it. They realize, oh, this is how I use that. Right. Versus I have to learn this because I need a diploma. And if I don't have a diploma, I don't have a job kind of a mindset.
Like this kind of student-based, project-based learning is what I also have to echo, working in the Waldorf schools. That's absolutely what I saw to be the most effective. And I had this vivid memory return to me of when I was teaching fractions in 4th grade. And like, everyone hates learning fractions for the first time. It's like, what are these numbers that are not whole numbers? Like, what's going on here? And, I remember introducing this to the kids by just bringing in apples and just like 30 cutting boards and real knives.
Yeah.
And I just put all these cutting boards and all these knives on these children's desks. Some people are going like, you what? You gave all the kids knives? Yeah. And we sat there with these apples, and we just sat there with these whole apples. And all I said is, first, I want you to cut this apple in half. Every kid in the room knew what that meant.
Yeah.
And I drew it on the board, 1/2, 1/2. Right? It already has more meaning than if I'm just abstractly writing that.
Yeah.
And then I said, now I want you to cut those halves in half. And I used that languaging, cut the halves in half. Right? Oh, okay, that's what a quarter is.
Yeah.
And go around, put 4 quarters on their desk, put $1 on their desk, Start talking about these things. It has so much more meaning for them. And like you said, they know how it works in the world. And it's not just a lofty concept. So I think that absolutely is, for some reason, what's missing from our public school curriculum, for sure.
Yeah, and I think math always poses, I think, a really good example because it becomes kind of this like black and white subject, I think, in the way we have our modern education system structured. So whenever you make something black or white, you basically end up with success or failure. Like there's really not a whole lot of middle ground there. So then you have kids who either love math or hate math. You don't have kids who just think, well, math is just a reality and I need to use it when I need to use it. So I think like one thing that we did that was kind of similar to that was we kind of changed it from math to like, this is just problem solving. So with like your apple experiment, like I think what I would have done is I would have given the whole apple and I would have said, okay, you have this apple and you have 7 friends, each person gets an even slice. How are we going to solve that problem? And then they learn eighths by doing that, solving that problem versus, just trying to like, run the math equation to figure that out on their own.
Totally. And then it's like, okay, well, now I want you to eat 1 piece. Okay, well, you don't have 8 pieces anymore. How many do you have? Can you write that down? What would that look like in writing? And really getting them to, it becomes a gift. Honestly, it becomes an invitation instead of you have to get the right answer. It's like, we get to solve this together. It's the spirit of curiosity and co-creation, and it invites them in to be a part of the solution. And I think that's the difference. It's all the mood and it's the energy behind how we're teaching these things. Yeah,
I think like one of the funniest stories I had with that type of a topic was we were doing the problem solving stuff, and I had a student who I think she was a freshman at the time, and she hated math. She had a hard time with math since kindergarten. So she just learned, she spent like essentially 8 years just basically learning that math was never going to help her, and it was just like a nightmare. And she solved the problem, and I was like, "That's awesome! You just answered that math question." And she's like, "No, I didn't." I'm like, "Yeah, you did." And she's like, "No, I didn't, because if this was a math problem, I would have never been able to do it." And I'm like, that's the mindset you need to get away from, is that you're looking at it through this lens of math when you should be looking at this lens of problem solving. And you can be a problem solver, and by being a problem solver, you can indirectly learn math. And that's what you just did. So it's all about the framing of it, I think, and in putting it into something where the person can relate and feel comfortable making mistakes. Because like if I tell someone to solve a problem, the assumption I think a lot of times is like, well, problems get solved through like progressions where I maybe do it kind of right the first time, and that gives me enough foundation to do a little better the next, a little bit the next, before you know it, I have it perfected. Whereas they look at math and they see it like, oh, the first go of it when I was developing that foundation was a failure because I got 30% of it right. So 30% is an F. And the next time I got 40%, 40% is an F, 50% is an F, 60% is maybe a D- at that point. I'm trying to remember. It's been too long. But you get what I'm saying. So by the time they perfect it, they've already failed 9 times in order to perfect it. And if that shows up on their grade sheet like that, then it doesn't look like they figured out the problem or solved the problem. It looks like they failed a bunch of times and then maybe got lucky at the end. Whereas in reality, they went through the natural progression of solving a problem.
That's so interesting. And life in general is not just a basic pass fail, right? That's
Right.
not how it works. It's like, can you fall down and see the good in it? And can you celebrate those micro achievements like we talked about and still brush yourself off and keep going no matter what? And I think that is, that's what's missing when we're putting percentages and even letter grades on things. I think in general, things have shifted away from that to a degree in the teaching, in the education systems. And I would like to see things go more and more in that direction where it's not like we're slapping letters that is somebody's, subjective point of view of how good something is. It's different with math, of course. I mean, there are solutions to problems, but and I want to actually talk about math specifically in relation to what you do, because I can tell you're a bit of a systems guy and like you like figuring things out. We were even talking about the math of course, you have it figured out for your trans-continental run of how many miles a day you're going to have to run in order to break the record which you're trying to do. Do you want to talk about that? And then also what you were telling me about the calories you'd have to consume. That was super fascinating.
That'll be a math problem for sure. But so the transcon, the record at the moment is an average of a little over 72 miles a day by a guy named Pete Koselnick. And Pete, one of the reasons I'm really excited about this is because I have so much respect for Pete. I don't even know that the transcon is his best, like long haul, like fastest known time. He also did this run, which was more, I don't know if anyone else has actually done it, but the way he did it was so impressive. It doesn't really even matter if he's the only one who did it. He pushed a stroller with all his supplies from Alaska all the way down to the Florida Keys. It was essentially the longest route he could take and still be in the United States the entire time. So, I can't remember how far that was, but he averaged like over 50 miles a day, which is just mind-boggling to me that he's not only going that far day after day after day for that long period of time, but he was also doing it without any help. So, I mean, he's sleeping on, the side of the road. Sometimes there is no road. He's got all the stuff in this stroller. All it takes is like one mistake and that goes terribly wrong for him.
That's savage.
It is, yeah. So I know I have my work cut out for me seeing that he's the one who has the record, but I'm up for the challenge. I think it'll be fun to try to go after something that is a pretty stout record. So whether I get it or not is besides the point, but I mean, it'll definitely be a fun kind of target or way to gamify it too. It gives me kind of a goal to shoot for. So 70
to 80 miles a day for how long do you think?
It'll be, if I do well and break the record, it'll be about 6 weeks total. So hopefully if we start in the middle of September, I'll end up finishing near the end of October or the very beginning of November.
So talk to me about preparing your body for something of that magnitude.
Yeah, so kind of my plan right now, and it's subject to change if I learn more between now and then, which I hope to do, but my plan at the moment is to target about 12 to 14 hours per day of what I guess we'll just call like moving time, so that I'm left with anywhere between 10 to 12 hours of time to sleep, which I think is going to be like the real pivotal part. If that starts to suffer, the wheels start to come off quickly. And so I have that time to kind of like both catch up on nutrition and rest and get ready for the next effort, because the biggest difference that this will pose versus what I've done historically is the stuff I've done historically have been single day efforts. So you do things on single day efforts that you wouldn't do on multi-day because the next day you don't have to move. Mm-hmm.
A lot of carbs.
Yeah, a lot of everything, a lot of excess. Yeah. But so I think knowing that I have to get up and repeat 70 to 80 miles if I want to break the record every day for 6 weeks straight means I have to do it sustainably versus unsustainably. And the way I structure my training and racing with single day things is I go in and out of what I would consider sustainable living. Like when I'm peaking for a 100-mile race or what I'm doing now, a 24-hour race, I'll do like a block of training that I would consider unsustainable. Like if I tried to do this every day all year long, I would burn out and be a shell of myself and start regressing versus progressing. And that's just part of the game. You kind of have to sharpen that spear just enough to where you're just like at a level that you couldn't sustain for a long periods of time and time it just right, get the race done and then reset. and let everything catch back up before you go through another one like that. Whereas this one, there's an element of that, but it has to be more precise in that, like I said, like, day one is followed by, 41 other days. So, so you have to be a little more mindful of like what you're doing to your body on any one given day, knowing that tomorrow you have to replicate. So nutrition will be a huge part of that too, because I have no idea how many calories I burn running 80 miles a day in and day out. I can ballpark it, but
what is the ballpark?
I'm thinking it's going to be at least 10,000.
10,000 calories a day.
Yeah, I want to say Pete said he was eating upwards to 15,000. So I'm keeping an open mind that it may be quite a bit greater than that. But to answer your question, I think essentially what I'm going to do is I'll either do it on my own or I'll do it in an event. And I'm just going to try to replicate like somewhere between 3 to 6 days of what it'll be like doing the Transcon. So then I can get an idea where, like, let's say I do a 6-day event and just run 75 miles each day. And I find out over the course of that 6 days, I lost 1 pound of body weight. Well, then I know that in order for the Transcon to be sustainable, I need to either be able to consume a little bit more than what I ended up consuming on that 6th day in order to make sure I'm not losing a pound every 6 days, or set myself up in a position where I can afford to lose a pound every 6 days over the course of 6 weeks. So it kind of puts you in a position, do you want to go into the event like at the most comfortable weight you perform at, or do you want to go in a few pounds heavier and kind of have a little bit of a mobile aid station on board?
So much strategy.
Yeah, and that's just some of the stuff I have to solve between now and then, just to figure out what's going to be my best route forward with that. And I think, and it could be a combination of stuff too. It could just be like, you go in a couple pounds heavy, just so you have a little bit of a buffer, and then you're trying to kind of maintain that. And the nice thing about it is intensity is relatively low compared to like what I would have to do for a single day event too. So the ability to eat 10 to 15,000 calories a day is going to be a little easier if I'm moving at an average pace of like 9 to 10 minutes per mile versus trying to run 6:48 mile pace like I did for the 100 mile. And so there's some relative advantages to it as well, where if you're sustaining yourself for the next day, it also means kind of pulling back a little bit on how hard you have to go at any one given time.
Totally. This is also fascinating too, because, you're talking about losing a pound or two here or there, but it's also probably not linear. Your body will adjust over the course of those 6 weeks and starts as like, okay, I'm consuming this amount of calories. So it changes too. Talk to me about even the concept of 10,000 calories is wild to me. Like, I mean, like I would have to put, like when I have to eat like 2,000 calories, I'm like, I'm so full. So tell me about, what does that look like beforehand? We were talking about ketones and kind of like ramping up your fat intake to prepare you for this. And then like during the event, you were telling me some interesting stuff about professional athletes, runners, and these like powders and how they can like just be really gross when you're trying to consume that much.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things you want to try to do on a race, like a single day race, is you don't want to give yourself digestive hurdles. So most folks are having like really, really easy to digest stuff, like essentially liquid carbohydrate calories. And that makes sense because it's a fast-acting fuel source. Your limited fuel tank is your muscle glycogen. That's the one you're going to deplete if you don't replace it. Whereas even the leanest endurance athletes on the planet have enough body fat that they can lean on that for a single day event. So for like an endurance race, like you can kind of trash your stomach by just like eating a bunch of these engineered fuels during the race. But the way I like to describe it is, imagine like if your kid just went trick-or-treating and brought home a bunch of candy, and then you sat down on the couch and just ate like a huge pile of that trick-or-treating candy, and think how like miserable you'd feel after you did that. And that's essentially what people are doing on these race courses for 100 miles. They're eating that type of stuff all day long. So the next day or even during the event, I think it's like a 60% chance you have a gastrointestinal issue by taking that route in a 100-mile race. So like you can't really do that on an event where you need to be able to go the next day and do it again, or you'll just I think you'll end up having like a lot of potential issues flare up that could sideline you. I mean, people can probably get away with it. I think Pete, I don't know exactly what Pete was eating. I'll have to sit down with him and just get a download of exactly what he was doing. But I think I'm going to probably put a little more attention in nutrition than perhaps he did, and really leverage food sources that are like super calorically dense, very, very low volume.
What are some examples?
I like any type of oil or any type of like nut butter. Basically any type of like pure fat source is going to be like super calorie dense. I mean, when you just think of it just like from a molecular level too, like if you look at the macronutrient of a carbohydrate, there's 4 kilocalories per gram, whereas fat's 9. So you're essentially getting over double the energy output or double the energy intake for the same size. And you know, when I'm gonna be eating over double what I normally would, even in a big training block during this. So I want that compromise, or not compromise. In this case, it would be an advantage, that space advantage, I guess, so that I can actually process and utilize that fuel day in and day out versus having it like, you know, backfire on me.
Where are you sleeping during this?
Yeah, so what Pete did is they just got like a full-size RV, and that kind of followed him throughout the course. So I think he stayed in some hotels when it was convenient and it was just on location and not that far off route. But there'll be a lot of that, a lot of like just, okay, this is where we're going to stop for the night. We're going to park the RV here, sleep, and then get up the next morning and start again and do it over again. So it gets a little tricky. Like there's areas where there's not places to park and you have to knock on doors and be like, hey, can we park this RV on your property? We're trying to run across the country. And, you know, I think most people are probably like, oh, cool. Yeah, go ahead and do it. But you never know. So there's a little bit of, I'll be leaning on my crew to help out with that for sure. So, you know, my wife will be there. We'll have someone driving the RV, and then we'll probably have people that are going to rotate in and out throughout the course that aren't able to take, you know, 6+ weeks off, but are wanting to help for brief periods of time too along the way. And Justin might come around for a bit to do some content stuff too, which would be a blast. Nice. And he's welcome for all 6 weeks, but I won't steal that much of his life if he's got other things to do.
He's in the room with us now, so for anyone
Justin's
listening,
like, give me 6 weeks.
He's making lots of excited faces. So your wife's a runner too, right? So what does she make of all this and these goals that you're setting?
Yeah, I mean, she's just crazy enough that she's getting behind it. Like when I told her I wanted to do this, she went to her employer and asked, like, is there any chance I'd be able to take some time off to help out with this? And they were really, really generous with her. And I mean, she's a great employee and a great runner herself. So I'm not shocked that they wanted to give her that opportunity to help out. But
did she run before you guys met?
Yeah. She's a much better runner than I am, actually. So that's the other funny angle to this. Like, Nicole got started at an earlier age than I did and started taking it seriously a lot earlier than I did. She was actually on the podium at state for track and cross country in high school. And then ultimately she was a D1 recruit for, she went to Northwestern ultimately, but she went to Wake Forest for her first year on scholarship before switching to Northwestern when she decided to go into law, and then ultimately Baylor for her law degree. And yeah, so she's just like a very motivated person. And the way I describe it is like, when I was teaching the last couple of years, I thought so highly of my work ethic because I'm like, okay, I can get up at 4 a.m, put in a 2-hour run, go to work, coach track in the afternoon, and then even maybe get a second run in and then rinse and repeat. And then I met her and I'm like, oh man, there's a whole nother level to that.
Wow.
Because she works so hard at everything. So it's, I've got a lot of motivation and a lot of incentive to, you know, find my own next levels and things like that by just watching her. And, like she races ultramarathons too. So she's right now preparing for a race next week called the Javelina 100 mile. And ultimately she'll do the Western States 100 next June, which is one of the most popular 100-milers available. And she's been on the podium there 3 times. So it's a race that she's done well at historically. And I think the last few years she's had better access to training that matches that environment. So we're excited to kind of see what she's able to do on the course next year.
It just sounds and it just feels like the two of you are just so proud of each other. And that meeting each other has helped the both of you kind of reach new heights and new goals that you probably didn't even think that you could reach. And I just think that's such a beautiful thing about partnership and about love is like when we meet someone that sees something in us that we didn't even see at first, and just them being who they are inspires us to be better. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know we joke around because like we have similarities, obviously, like our running ambitions and just our drive to succeed at what we take, like that we're passionate about are very similar. But I mean, we have big differences too, where I joke around with her and say like, hey, if like because every once in a while, she's maybe a little more practical than I am or realistic with things. So sometimes every once in a while, she'll just say something like, I hope you don't feel like I'm kind of holding you back or like kind of like pulling your dreams back a little bit. And I'm like, no, I need you to do that, because if you don't pull me down like that, then I'm going to end up in a van somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, just like running on some random route. So I think you're right about that. I think we have a lot of similarities that help us coexist, but we also have differences that I think complement one another, where some of her strengths are things that I need in my life to stay on track. And I think some of the stuff that like maybe I'm stronger at are helpful for her in order to kind of just balance out some of the stuff that she does. And she's a little more in the corporate world than I am. And, that can have its own stress too.
I'd love to talk about mindfulness and the mental component, because we've talked about what a physical feat all of this is. But you were sharing a story of, say, you're trying to hit 75, 80 miles in a day, and you're at that 50 mile mark and things start to get a little bit gnarly in your head. You have to have this ability to sort of compartmentalize. And you particularly, you have a podcast, it's called the Human Performance Outliers podcast, is that right? So you speak with a lot of top athletes, performance athletes, and you have your finger on the pulse of what is the difference between a good athlete and a great one and an unstoppable one. So if you could speak a little bit about some of your golden nuggets of wisdom in the mental space, I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think the mental aspect of ultramarathoning and ultimately what the mental aspect of the trans-con effort will be is just like a really big element to it. And what I find like that I maybe struggled with a lot more earlier in my career that I've gotten better at is really kind of trying to break it down into what it is. Like your mind will always try to get you to quit, and it will always try to get you to pull back. And that's just a safety mechanism more than anything. I think like, you're out there doing these weird things, like trying to run all day long. It's like your body doesn't want you to do that to it, at least like, and it doesn't know that you're not going to do it to it indefinitely. So like once you start to fatigue physically, like your brain starts giving you all these reasons to stop or slow down or excuses, and those pop up more frequently the further you get. So like the way I describe it is like the first third of like 100-miler, you may have a couple things pop up that are like negative or self-doubt, but you can just kind of swat those down really easily at that point. And then that middle third, they start kind of getting a little more frequent. You're still able to push through it for the most part, but you get to a point where like you got about a third of the race left, and it seems like every minute another like excuse pops up that you have to try to push through. So for me, it's like I always try to kind of minimize the task at hand. So rather than thinking about, oh, I'm 40 miles into this 100-miler, I'm running 60 more miles, I'm trying to think about like, okay, well, what's my next objective? And maybe if I'm at mile 40, it's just getting the next 3 miles on pace, and I can worry about, whatever's next once I get to that. And when you kind of when you package it in things that you can easily wrap your head around, I think you just kind of do that over and over again, and before you know it, you're down to the last one, and you can start wrapping your head around what you're doing. So I've learned a lot of mental tricks to kind of help with that. And one of them is just minimizing the event itself. So if I'm lining up for a 100-miler, I'm also leaning on somewhere probably between 4 to 6 months of training, which could be anywhere from 10 to 20 hours a week worth of work throughout the course of that time frame. So when you think about like, running all day, it's a big effort, but relative to the entirety of what you did to get ready for it, it's very small. So even at the starting line of a 100-miler, I try to talk myself into thinking like I'm 99% of the way here. I've done 99% of what I need to do to have a successful day. So this race itself is small. And I think when you can position it in your mind that way, it just makes some of those hard parts seem a lot less. And then you also have, I think, just a little more incentive not to pull the plug early, because like pulling the plug at mile 60 of a 100-mile might feel good in the moment because you're like, okay, I can hit the reset button, try it again. But when you look at it, like if I hit the reset button at mile 60 of a 100-mile, I'm hitting the reset button with 99.5% of the work done. So it's like, do you really want to quit when you're 99.5% of the way there, or do you want to put that final touch on it? And I think that really helps me kind of pull back from trying to look at any one individual thing as being too big and splice it into smaller little steps along the way. So the Transcon will be a little different, being that event is so much bigger that I'll have to probably be chunking every day, and then every day will be a chunk as well. So it's just maybe a little bit more of a bigger overall view. But still, I think the same concept applies. And only time will tell if that philosophy works, I guess.
I love all this. This is super powerful. These themes of, mental reframing, chunking, sort of these micro goals. And as you were talking about all this, I was sitting here being pulled back to some of my experiences living in Costa Rica over the winter and working with ayahuasca down at Soltara Healing Center. And, we talk about psychedelics a lot in this podcast. And I was pretty deep into working with this medicine, maybe 10 weeks in, drinking this highly psychedelic brew every week. And things were starting to get pretty gnarly in my ceremonies. I was having a lot of trauma come up. I was processing a lot. And I started to develop this fear going in. I did not want to go into ceremony. And I knew that I had to keep peeling through these layers. And it reminds me of like when you're getting to that second, third, or even the third where you're like, okay, I don't know if I can keep doing this. That was me in this process of my own healing. And one tool that came to me was, and once you take this stuff, there is no stopping, right? It's like you're gone. So there's also this layer of panic with that. It's like, once I take off, I can't quit the race. I'm in it till it's done. And so I found this mantra that helped me, which was just, I can do anything for one breath. One breath. Because I think that if I had to experience the intensity of the emotions that I was experiencing for infinity, which is, what it feels like in that warped psychedelic space, I'm like, I am literally going to die from this emotional pain right now. I would just tell myself, I'd say, this breath. Now this one, now this moment, and every moment's new, right? And if I just survive one more moment, then I can worry about the next one when it's here. And I think that's just so beautiful. And that your story reminded me of that. It's like, it's not about all of it at once. It's about, can I keep pace for 3 more miles? That's it, this breath.
Yeah, I think like that's a great parallel. And I think it definitely highlights what I see that I had to learn. And everyone essentially who does this sport learns at some point, or if they don't, they end up not in the sport for very long. But it's just this like, it gets bad at points, but that doesn't mean it's going to stay that bad for the rest of it. So one of the biggest traps that I think catches people, and it's probably the leading, if I had to guess, it's the leading cause of people dropping out of these events, is like, you get to this point, let's say you're 63 miles into a 100-miler and you hit the lowest low you've ever experienced in an event. And your mind just goes to, I can't be in this state for another 37 miles. I can't. And they're probably right. They probably can't be in that state for another 37 miles. But the reality is, if you push through, you won't be in that state for the 37 miles. When you have 34 miles left, you'll probably be through that and you'll be feeling maybe the best you have all day. And until you kind of experience that, it's just almost impossible, I think, to wrap your head around that kind of a process, because that's just not how I think most people's minds are programmed. They're thinking like it more, they're thinking of it as being kind of more like just a progression of what's going on, where you're feeling great at the starting line and then you're just wearing down, like a battery draining. And then once it's drained, you can't go back until you stop and plug it in. Whereas in a race, you can feel terrible at one point and great 20 miles later, and you're just saddled with this weird kind of mental framework of, how did running 20 more miles make me feel better versus continuing down that negative path or that bad feeling. So you have a few experiences, I think, where you're just, for whatever reason, a little mentally more tough than you were in the past, and you get through that and you get to see that. And I think the more times you see that, the more prepared you are to kind of accept that when you are in an event and you have less opportunity, or you just are, you're less vulnerable when those things happen. And for me, I've really loved experimenting with that in training too, where, maybe there's I'm supposed to run 20 miles, and at 10 miles I feel bad and I have to decide whether I should just call it quits for the day and maybe reconvene. Because there's a time when like a workout's not happening and it's best for you to rest and go back and try again. But then there's times where you might want to just keep going and experience that in training so that you're armed with more opportunities to reflect on when you have that happen to you in a race. And I found a lot of value in kind of learning when and when not to kind of do that in training, and when's the right time to do it, and when is it maybe a little too aggressive. And I mean, it's just a big puzzle essentially.
Completely. I mean, this is so beautiful about leaning into the discomfort, and not making assumptions, not creating strong stories around this, and being open to being wrong. Like, I love being wrong, especially when it comes to people. You make an assumption about a person, and maybe you have some criticisms or judgments, and then you get to know them and you're like, that was totally me projecting my shit onto that person. And they're so wonderful. And we do this all the time. Like, say you're afraid of trying something new or falling in love. And it's that same, like, I can't do this. This is all wrong. This feels wrong. This is bad. And whoa, there's so much learning for you there. Just to stay and just to be curious about, what's going on for you, and really peel back the layers and not assume that because things are headed in one trajectory, that they're going to end in that same downward trajectory.
Yeah.
I think when you can be open to changing, that's where all the magic is, when you can be open to being wrong. And this is, I think what we're seeing on a global scale is just generally misunderstanding each other and being not open or unwilling to be wrong, instead of taking that playful, childlike curiosity of like, oh, well, maybe there's some gold in here, or maybe this person can teach me something, or, maybe on the other side of this is just the best version of me that there ever was. Doesn't mean I'm going to just burn out and trip and fall and, So I think that I love everything that you're saying. And I think for anyone listening, it's just such an invitation to lean into these sharp bits, to get curious about where we each contract or feel fearful. And, it's all about getting to know yourself on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think when you look at the life experiences for what they are, I think you start to get a little clarity with that. And, you deprogram the idea of failure, meaning that you didn't succeed, but as an opportunity to use that for success. And I think people hear about my 100-mile time and things like that, and they just think, wow, that's cool. But, it doesn't happen if I didn't fail a bunch of times leading up to it. It just doesn't, because there was just too many points during that event itself where I was reflecting back on times I failed and recognizing similarities that I needed to avoid in order to be successful. And without those experiences, then I don't have that background knowledge, and maybe I make that same mistake just further down the road.
What would you say to somebody listening who is just so inspired by your story, but is saying to themselves, I could never do anything like that because of that moment that you were talking about of like, okay, if I fail at this, am I going to go back to teaching with my tail between my legs? And honestly, the fear of that for some people is enough to keep them stuck and to keep them small. So what would be your advice to those people?
Yeah, I would tell them I was you 5-10 years ago. That's kind of the reality. Obviously, everyone has a unique circumstance. So I think people want to be, I think you definitely should be mindful of whether it's something that you're really, truly passionate about, or if it's something that's a fleeting emotion. And, give yourself some time to really figure out what it is you want to be doing. But if it's something you want to be doing, then look at what it's going to take to get there and see if that's something that's going to be an enjoyable life experience for you. I think, when I was teaching, you always see this, I think, especially with younger kids and stuff, where they're like, I don't want to do my homework. I don't want to go to class. I just want to be like a professional skateboarder or a professional musician or something like that. Those are great things to aspire to. They also require a ton of work. So I think of just some musicians, one I would use as an example is Zach Wilds from Black Label Society. He would stay up all night, rumor has it, he would stay up all night playing guitar. So he'd play guitar like 12 hours a day. And he would fall asleep during class, and I'm sure his teachers gave him a lot of grief for it. And he became a very, very successful musician, not because he had a high school diploma, but because he put in a boatload of work to get there. So when I would have a student who would say, like, that's fine if you want to be a professional musician, that's fine if you want to be a professional athlete, but be ready to put in the work that someone does to get there, and then show them this is what it takes. This is probably what you have to do if you want to get there. And then if they want to do that, great. Then they probably will be the next professional musician or sports figure or something like that if they're willing to put in that much time and energy into it, if they're that passionate about it that they want to surround like almost the entirety of their existence around this given, aspect of, or this activity or whatever it is they're passionate in. And those are extreme examples, obviously, but I think it just highlights just the idea that, like, step one is finding something you think you enjoy. Step two is actually understanding what it takes to be able to do that and do it at the level that you want to be able to, and ask yourself. And it's similar to what I talk about when I say, like, with training. Like, if I get to a point where, like, it's like pulling teeth to put in the 4 months to get ready for a race, and the only reason I'm doing it is because I want to try to, like, run a faster time than I ever have, or beat some person or something like that, then I know I've aged myself out, or I've grown out of that activity. It's time to move on to do something else. So I think backup plans are wise. I think being honest with yourself is wise, but also being open-minded enough to know, like, what do you actually care about, and giving yourself the opportunity to learn what that is, because experiences are what highlight what you actually know about. Like, had I never run a race in my life or gone out for a run, I would have maybe never found out that I liked it. And then had I not been curious enough to explore that world, then, who knows what I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the case for a lot of people. So being open-minded and also just curious enough to be looking at what's available to you and what's around you, what can you be doing, and really finding yourself.
I think finding your purpose is such a theme right now. I know it's coming up over and over for the clients that I'm working with. And what I'm noticing is a lot of us are afraid to dream. Mm-hmm. I'll ask people, what is it that you love? What is it that you want to do more than anything in the world? And a lot of times people are like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm like, you do know. Like, you actually know what you love, mm-hmm. but you're afraid to admit it to yourself because it feels too far out of reach. Or maybe not too far out of reach, but you go, I can't turn that thing into the thing. I can't make money doing that. So we don't even let ourselves dream big, mm-hmm. and splash around in the delicious feeling of even fantasizing about what we want to do, because it doesn't seem realistic, mm-hmm. And I think that is actually the first mental training, is to just allow yourself to love the thing that you love without denying that you love it, mm-hmm. and feel the immensity of, like, oh God, I really love running. I don't know if I can make it a thing, but I want to. Mm-hmm. I love it more than anything in the world. And if you never let yourself love running, or even dream about the possibility of it being, more, then you probably would have never gotten there. And I'm curious about that moment for you, of when you realized, oh, this is a thing. And now there's like sponsorships coming in and all this, like, I can make this a full-time. Was that a little bit of a strange moment for you, where was it all of a sudden, or I know you've been on Joe Rogan a couple times. Did you have any peak moments where you suddenly realized, like, I am a runner. This is what I was meant to do. I am a runner.
Yeah. It's because I think in high school and college, I loved to run, and I liked the competition side of it, and I liked the training. But I knew I wasn't going to be an Olympic 5K runner. I knew I wasn't going to, break national records or world records at the 10K, the marathon, and that sort of stuff. So, like, for me, like, running had to be a hobby first, and I had to like it enough to invest a lot of my free time into it. So I think that was the sign to me that, like, okay, this is something that it's worth my time, because I'm getting enjoyment out of it. It's fulfilling to me, regardless of where I was finishing in races, I was like intrigued enough about the self-development through the process of running. I saw enough crossovers from the lessons you learn from training for and competing in races, that how they cross over into other areas of life, that it was something I was willing to invest that time into. So I think what ended up happening is I liked it enough that I invested that time, even when it was for free, to the point where I had some opportunities, like you said, to kind of start shifting my focus more towards that versus what I had been doing. And some of it was just like also being open to what else is available within this framework. Because when I think of like another example too, like when I was talking about becoming like a professional musician, like you don't have to start, at Madison Square Garden in front of a huge crowd of people. You can start with just getting into an occupation that is around music. And, while you're doing that, while you're framing or structuring that career, you can be working on it as a hobby alongside too, and finding your successes along the way, finding where you actually enjoy being within that world. And, if you get to a point where that becomes something you can start becoming a professional at directly, then it'll present itself. And I think that's kind of how it played out for me with running too. I was putting in the time and the work when it was just a labor of love. And then I got to a point where I had enough success that I could start monetizing things like coaching and, getting paid to go to races and like go to events and things like that. And ultimately have sponsors who want to, pay you to train and race, to pay you to help them with their marketing scheme, help them with their product development and that sort of stuff. So, I've kept a lot of that around too. I still coach. I work for some of my sponsors to a degree outside of the training and racing too. And for me, I think that's part of the enjoyment of it is having all those other kind of irons in the fire that are also interesting and also kind of create a space for you within that community versus just kind of being, okay, I'm an athlete and this will last however many years and then I have to find like the next chapter in my life. I like the idea of like, if I really like this community, then I want to be in it for a long period of time. So I'm going to position myself in a way where I'm valuable outside of just my race results or outside of my own training and that sort of stuff.
Mm. Beautiful. As we come to the end here, I want to ask you to reflect back on your whole running career thus far and really tune into if there's a memory from all of this. Maybe it's a sunrise or a sunset or a place you were running or a moment when you broke a record, and with as much, of that moment as you can. Would you tell us a story about your favorite peak moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I've got a few that I could probably look at from that angle, but the one that probably stands out the most to me was it was actually in 2019. I was training for this race called the San Diego 100 Mile. And the reason this one stands out is because it's a trail event. It's a little different environment than what I've normally tried to peak for. But I decided before that build up, in order for me to be able to really enjoy going after the 100-mile world record, I needed to step away from it and just give myself an opportunity to kind of train in a little different way, train in a different environment, pick a different focus, let that goal of trying to break the 100-mile world record just rest for like half a year and regain that kind of passion to really put in the work and the desire to go after it again. And through that process, that definitely happened. When I did get back to kind of training for the flat stuff, I was like, I felt like, okay, I got this like extra bit of ambition to put in the work and really go after this. But the other things I learned in the race itself was going into that race and going into every other 100-miler I'd done historically, my mindset was kind of like this, this idea of like, it's almost impossible to run your best race and have the back half of it be better than the first half. I thought like the reality is just from the physical wear and tear and the mental drain over the course of an entire day, the reality is you're going to be running at least slightly slower in the second half. And the San Diego 100 was the first 100 miler I'd done where I felt the best from probably mile 70, 75 to the finish. And like, if I could have felt like that for the first 3/4 of the race, I would have taken it in a heartbeat, which is an experience I had never had before. And what that did for me, I think, was, I mean, it did two things essentially. That reset, coming away from the flat kind of track-based running and going out into the mountains and doing trail runs, steep climbing and descending, some technical work and things like that, was just a different mindset, which I definitely got that refresher then for when the energy back for the flat stuff. But I also had a new like a way to look at the race itself, where when I went into the event where I ultimately broke the 100-mile world record, I went in there thinking, I don't need to run so fast the first half that I have a buffer to fall back on. I can run a little more sustainably in the first half and trust that I'll be able to run hard at the end. And I think I used that, as well as a lot of my past experiences, to kind of hit benchmarks along the way, where I put myself ultimately in a position where I ran my fastest miles at the end. So like the easiest way to look at it is just looking at it in 2 50-mile races, where the first 50 miles I ran 5 hours and 40 minutes, and the second 50 miles I ran 5 hours and 38 minutes. So I negative split the race. And had I not had that experience of building up to and racing the San Diego 100 and having the race play out the way it did, where I felt better the last fourth, I don't know that I would have had the confidence or the wherewithal to even take on the 100-mile track race the way I did. So that's the one that probably sticks out the most.
That is so beautiful. I love that. It's like we split open our own paradigm and we rip open every single story of limitation that we've ever had. It's the best feeling in the whole world, man. Amazing. So Zach, I was on your website before this, and I would love for you to talk about the consults that you offer, how if people want to coach with you or get in touch with you, maybe give your website, your Instagram, and remind people of your podcast and where they can find you.
Cool. Yeah. I think my website kind of has like the central location, more or less. Most of the stuff I do is kind of tethered to that. So my website is zachbitter.com. There you can reach out to me I do full package coaching if people are like saying, I want to do this event and it's in this type of environment. How do I get from day one to the finish? Help folks with that. I also do like one-off consult calls or groupings depending on how they want to structure it. So sometimes that supplements the training. Other times people just have a lot of questions revolved around essentially anything they think I can help them with, but most of the time they're coming to me for running. And they can sign up for those there as well. Instagram is the social media channel I'm probably the most engaged with, and that's just at Zach Bitter.
Zach, thank you so much for your time. You are such an inspiring, intelligent, magical human being. I am so blessed for the opportunity to get to know you and to begin cultivating a friendship with you. And I cannot thank you enough. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing your story and for being here today on the show.
Yeah, it was my pleasure to come on. It's been fun to get to know you, and it'll be fun to continue to get to know you. And just one more thing that Justin has brought to my life is more friends. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you.